Hi, and welcome to the Antipolitica channel. Today is Saturday, January 7th. We are ending this turbulent week in which we selected the new Speaker of the House. And one of the things that became clear over the course of this week is that Donald J. Trump is definitely back on the scene and very important. So today I wanted to talk about his legacy and the legacy of his first term. And argue that really, even though much has been said about his different mistakes, I really recognize only one legitimate criticism of Donald Trump. He has done many, I believe, great and very, very important things, such as including a series of primaries in the Republican Party, winning the election over Hillary Clinton, and changing profoundly many things. And I believe that most of that legacy is hugely positive. That may be controversial, and I'll talk about that on some other occasion. But today I wanted to talk about the usual criticisms of Donald Trump and why I believe that most of them are not justified or can at least be questioned, and really go over one single criticism that I believe is valid. Let's just get obvious nonsense out of the way first. And these are the usual charges of being totalitarian, authoritarian, and other similar nonsense. In reality, there was very little executive overreach. If anything, he kept many people too long and didn't fire them early enough. So to talk about him being authoritarian and totalitarian is just utter nonsense that doesn't really need much discussion. A relatively more valid criticism is the one about him being divisive and writing all those mean tweets. However, even here, many of those mean tweets that are often cited and his personal style and flamboyance, much of that comes from his prior life as a TV show host and somebody who is an entertainer. So there's something insidious at work here, and that is this idea that nobody who has ever said or done anything controversial in their prior life should run for office. So this is profoundly anti-democratic and legitimate. Even though it may seem counterintuitive, this should be dismissed as something that disqualifies anybody from running for office. The other thing is that, for example, if you look at his feud with Rosie O'Donnell, given the absence of any totalitarian tendencies that I just talked about, if anything, this gave prominence to Rosie O'Donnell, and Donald Trump, being an entertainer, probably knows that. That's good publicity, and having public feuds with the President of the United States, in his case, should not be scary, but an opportunity to gain prominence. One final thought on this is that as much as he ushered a new era in politics, his approach to tweeting and responding to criticisms and fighting back probably ushered a new era in our culture. In which people are increasingly refusing to submit to what's often referred to as the woke mob and fold and apologize. So as much as we may disagree with what he said at certain occasions, the fact that he was willing to double down and refusing to bow to certain fashions and policing of words is actually probably in the long run a contribution and something that's positive. I believe that people should be feel free to speak freely and articulate what they think and feel without fear of being canceled. And if you have this kind of approach emanate from the top of the political pyramid, from the President of the United States, this kind of legitimizes this brave approach in which, of course, you don't want to go overboard and abuse people and threaten them and do other things that are clearly outside the boundaries of good behavior, but being somewhat abrupt can be a good thing, and refusing to bow down always is also potentially a good thing. So this criticism, I don't think it's valid. We can look at this from multiple angles, and it's not really clear that it's universally bad, the fact that he tweeted some mean tweets and had some things that were not pleasant for everybody to say. That's just his personal style, and it is important for people to be allowed to have their personal style and still be president of the United States. So I think it's healthy for all of us to get used to it rather than try to police language and unanimity. Okay, the third criticism is actually the most hard-hitting and most legitimate, and people like Ken Coulter and other prominent critics of Donald Trump have emphasized his poor choices in appointments that he made and his HR management in general. Clearly, he appointed a whole bunch of people that turned out to be not that good, that ended up sabotaging him and really slowing down his MAGA agenda. So this is a legitimate criticism, but here I have a somewhat controversial thought and something that I'd like to get your opinion on. And that is this idea that Donald Trump fought forces that are clearly very powerful. You can call them deep state, you can call them networks of lobbies and lobbyists, and this kind of incestuous political / business / media class that's highly interconnected and seems to have universally hated him and anything that he represents. So here is the thought. Had Donald Trump marched into the office beginning of his term and started to make really good HR appointments in which he eliminated all rhinos, all snakes, and made exclusively MAGA type appointments, maybe what could have happened is that this interconnected network and class of people who hated him would have galvanized quicker to really eliminate the threat in some very decisive way. So by his somewhat erratic appointments and somewhat undisciplined behavior, maybe he lulled them into thinking that they could deal with him in the long run. But don't doubt for a second that many prominent political individuals, politicians in the House and the Senate, were not ready to vote him out of office at any time. We have seen that recently with Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, Mitt Romney. All these people would have happily pulled the trigger and voted to impeach him and remove him from office had they had a chance. And maybe they would have received that signal that the time is right early on, and maybe they would have all galvanized around this agenda of ousting Trump had he behaved more MAGA-like in a very disciplined and organized fashion. So I don't know whether this was deliberate or just by accident, but in the long run it ended up being genius. The obstacles and the hurdles that he faced are so strong and so high that we are still dealing with them, and today is a good week to talk about them. I believe that we have made significant progress in this fight of returning the system to the people, and I'll talk about that in a future video. But how about this idea? And Coulters of the world and other critics. Had he made more appointments to your liking, would he have risked being impeached decisively and early on? And if you think about the January 6th process that we just saw unfold with the previous Congress, in which they refused to release all the videos, in which they refused to interrogate many of the participants, and with all the murky questions that still remain unresolved. All that seems like a farce now, and the vast number of people out there, and especially with those Twitter files coming out, are realizing that we do have a problem with institutions and meddling of the FBI and other three-letter agencies in our elections. So given the strength of the resistance he was facing, had he gone in decisively and started to make very, very clear MAGA-like appointments and disassemble these networks of individuals across these institutions and these networks would have put up a much more decisive, abrupt, and immediate resistance. Him being the way he was gave him enough time to make some progress, but not as much as many would have liked. But that was maybe a good thing, because had he tried more, had he reached for more, maybe he would not have lasted to the end of the term. And him lasting to the end of the term gave us enough time to deal with the COVID pandemic and all these other issues that are taking some time to get resolved and sink in with sufficient numbers of people, that maybe we were either fortunate, or maybe he and people, narrow group of people around him are such geniuses that they did this by design. So critics, and interestingly, Matt Gaetz, who really played a pivotal role this week, he went on Hannity and a couple of other shows, and he talked about how his Donald Trump's HR policies and endorsements were not always perfect. That is true on the face of it. But maybe in the long run, that was absolutely the best thing to do, because had he been more consistent, maybe that could have caused some serious problems. Okay, the fourth and the most valid criticism in my mind, and something for which among the many things and many credits that I would give to Donald Trump, one thing that would be my criticism, which I believe is legitimate, is his marketing of the idea of the border wall. I think that the way it was marketed gave a lot of people on the opposite side an excuse to falsely accuse him of racism. And it really unnecessarily framed our relations with Mexico in a kind of zero-sum or combative manner, and there was no need for that. I would have suggested emphasizing how building the border wall and putting a stop to trafficking of drugs and people would have been better for good thing for both countries. It was unnecessary to talk about Mexico will pay for it and so forth. I would have advised suggesting this kind of positive framing in which the wall would help both the United States and Mexico, and probably Mexico even more than the United States. He should have emphasized the notion that having these networks and cartels that traffic drugs and people, that makes them very powerful within Mexico. Within large sections of Mexico, drug trafficking and other criminal activities are the most profitable activities, and what that does is that it makes these cartels more powerful than the government itself. So cutting that supply of oxygen to these criminal networks would give Mexican authorities a chance to reestablish a sense of law and order, and this would have been good for the Mexican people and the Mexican economy and the relations between the two countries. And maybe even go as far as to suggest that we just need the border wall now to stabilize things, and once Mexico is basically catches up with the level of development and solves these problems of cartels and criminal networks, then maybe we can remove the wall. Ideally, that border would look like the border with Canada, but we are just not there yet. We need the wall to solve a burning problem. This is not about racism. This is not about nationalism. This is just something that's about law and order, and something that should help Mexico even more than the United States. I think that we are good neighbors. Mexican Americans have made huge contributions to this society. I believe, and in my experience, a vast majority of Americans are very positively predisposed toward Mexico and Mexicans, and my experience is that the same is the case to the south of the border. People may have criticisms of the United States and some Americans, but in general, the predisposition toward the United States is very, very positive. So we are good neighbors. We can become even better neighbors. Mexico should grow and prosper, and we should also grow and prosper and be secure and happy on this Northern American continent. So positivity would have been something that I would have marketed better when it comes to the border wall. I love Mexico and Mexicans, and there is no need to basically be hostile and talk about, oh, Mexico will pay for the border wall. That was tangential. Positivity was, at least in my mind, a much better selling point. So, Mexico lindo y querido. Let's keep it up. So a future video will talk about this week and why I believe that what we have seen this week is very positive, and I'll praise some people in Congress on that occasion. So with that, thank you all so much. Please consider liking or subscribing to this channel, and of course I'd love to hear your thoughts because I basically propose some maybe controversial ideas here. So I'd love to hear your feedback and thoughts on what you just heard. Take care. Bye-bye.